Alright, so with this third video, I'm going to be showing you the process of working with a character that has a completely different setup than the mannequin. And this is going to be one of the most complex setups you might have to work with, just due to the nature of the skeleton. You need to do a lot of retargeting, stuff like that. So this is going to be probably a longer video. I might split it up into two different parts depending on what kind of issues we face later down the line. But so with this demo, I'm going to be using the Polygon Knights pack, the characters from there found in the marketplace, and this is just a great example of a character that was not built for the mannequin specifically. Right off the bat, you can see this. There's no IK bones here. Also, if you look in the skeleton tree, while the hierarchy is the same, same number of spines, everything like that, some of the joint names are different. And also, one of the biggest issues or differences is the joint orientations are different as well. So if you look at this joint, you can see the orientation of the joint. So the X is pointing down, the Y is pointing in this direction, and the Z is kind of pointing front to back. In the mannequin skeleton, if you look at that same joint, the X is still down, but this time, the Z is off to the side and the Y is front to back. And this is a great indication that you're going to need to do retargeting instead of just sharing skeletons or stuff like that, because if you apply the rotational values of the animations made for the mannequin onto the knight skeleton, you get some really funky results. And I prepared kind of an example to show you what might happen if you try to do that. So this is what would happen if you try to share animations without doing any sort of retargeting. Obviously everything's kind of twisted up because the rotational values of the animation are being applied to the bones with different orientations. Things just, you see the head is off to the side, everything's just completely weird. The positions are the same, but just the rotations mixed with the orientations just kind of mess a lot of stuff up. So you can't do the same things that we were doing in the previous two setups. You're going to have to do a lot of retargeting. So I'll just show you how to do that kind of stuff now. So before you retarget within Unreal, you have to make sure there's a few things that are set up correctly. So if you open up a skeleton asset, you can go into Retarget Manager here, and you have what's called a rig, which is basically just mapping bones to one another so that when you retarget, certain bones know which bones to retarget to. Most of the time you're going to be using a humanoid rig, which is what the mannequin uses. So you see in here I've set everything up so the joints match up correctly, and the mannequin is already set up. And one other thing that you need to keep in mind is the retarget pose. So with this character, it's in a T pose. However, and this is just important because when you retarget, it uses the retarget poses as a way to kind of add offsets or rotational offsets, kind of like an additive animation when you retarget, and that'll take care of the joint orientation problems. So with the mannequin, you can see it's in like a traditional A pose, and we can't, if you retarget with a A pose to a T pose, you can get some things that are messed up with the arms. So in the newest version of the system in 4.19, I've included a T pose that you can use. So if you go down here to modify pose, you can actually use a pose asset and import that T pose and set that to be the retarget pose, and that's what we're going to use during the retarget process. And that's just an extra thing I added to make it super easy so you don't have to manually create a pose or anything like that. So if I want to retarget now, what I can do is I can go into the mannequin's animation blueprint, and if I right click on that and go up to retarget animation blueprints, I can duplicate and retarget the whole entire animation blueprint instead of each individual animation. And so if I click on Knight Skeleton, you can see that pops up here. I just want to double check to make sure the poses are the same. The default settings should be good, and I'm just going to replace the names here just so I can distinguish them from one another. I'm also going to change the folder. It's to animation, something like that. And if everything's done correctly, this might take a second, but you should see that we get a whole bunch of new animations, and all of these animations are used by that animation blueprint. So you can just retarget the blueprint, and now all the animations that it needs get retargeted as well. And here's the blueprint here. I'm just going to rename that to Knight and BP. I'm also going to save everything. And if you go and look at one, let's say like walk forward, you see that this looks a lot better than the previous example. You know, the joint orientations are the same, and thankfully, because the retarget poses were similar, it's looking pretty good. There's not a ton of, you know, extra work that you might have to do. Obviously, there's no IK bones, but we can get to that in a minute. So now I'm just going to create a new character. In the previous examples, I was duplicating the mannequin character here, but now I'm just going to create a child of the base character blueprint. Call it something like Knight character, and that'll just create a child of the base. So you still get all that same logic, but you can just have a completely different mesh or settings or, you know, whatever you need. So with this, I'm going to select one of the Knight characters. Let's see, move it down into position. This looks good. And also you can see the camera is kind of following along here, and it's not attached to the head yet. So because the first person camera is inherited, you can't change the socket directly. It says if you try to that you can't change the socket on like an inherited component. So what I did within the main blueprint is, if you go to, let's see, the camera system right here, I created a first person camera socket variable, and if you just type in the name of the head joint for this character, it should attach it, and then you can just, you know, edit these transform values to get it into position. So something like that. That looks pretty good. Compile. And then for the mesh, we can use the animation blueprint that we just made, and that's already working, so that's really good. I'm just going to bring that into the level. Let's see. And like before, just make it playable and just play test it real quick. As you can see, animations are working, you know, pivots are working, that kind of thing. Obviously we haven't set up IK yet, so the IK is not working, but we can do that right now. So like before, this skeleton does not have IK bones, so we're going to need to use virtual bones. I'm going to create a virtual bone in the root, make the root its target, IK foot root like that. Then we'll create two more, one for the right foot, and then second one, target is the left foot. Oops. Just like that. You see you got the bones there. And then what we can do is we can just grab that IK animation blueprint, and the same as we did with this one, we can right click and duplicate it and retarget it. Let's see. Replace the name. Change that folder. Just like that. And if I do it correctly, we should get it for the Knight character. Now we're going to get some errors here. You know, the bone names are different because we're using virtual bones. Also, we have these two knee bones that aren't found in the skeleton, so we're going to need to create those as well. So these just assist in the, so if you look on the mannequin, there are these two extra virtual bones here. They just pretty much assist in the knees during the IK process. It's more of a visual thing. So create that virtual bone, right click on the thigh, and make that follow the calf. And then same as the other leg. And the name should be the same, so if I compile that, those errors should go away just like that. That's awesome. And then same as in the second setup, I want to rename everywhere it says IK foot something to the virtual counterpart of that. So that one's IK foot L, this one will be IK foot R, and these two nodes down here, find the effector target, IK foot L. Same thing for the other one, IK foot R. And then down here, change into the virtual bones, L and R. If we compile that, we shouldn't get any errors. That should be good. And just for preview purposes, I'm going to enable foot IK by default. And then the next thing we're going to need to do is actually apply that to each mesh in the post-process instance. The easiest way is just to go the properties matrix like we did before, select that IK blueprint and apply it that way. Once we save everything, it should get applied. Now if you look, if I put a preview animation on, let's see, walk forward, some funky things are going on. Because of the different joint orientations, the post-process blueprint is kind of messing up the knees, so thankfully we can edit that really easily. And this is stuff you're going to have to do kind of per character. Depending on your situation, you might need different values, everything like that. So you see where it says, translation Y, I'm going to, instead of 30, I'm going to bring it to -30. And same thing with down here, I'm going to change that to positive. Compile that. Should make the knees point the right way. Also what we can do, you see those knees look a little bit maybe close together, these virtual bones. So we can add an offset in the Z, maybe like, I don't know, 3, -3, something small. It doesn't really need to be. And that'll make the knees look a little bit nicer. Also another thing that you can notice down here, it looks like the feet are kind of hovering above the ground there. So we can just add an offset value on the foot offset. Let's see. Like we did before. So I'm just going to subtract the value there. Put that into translation Z. And I can promote this to a variable, something like foot retarget offset, something like that. Again, this is just per character stuff. I mean, your skeleton might be different, the proportions and everything. So something like 3 should be good. Put it down there on the ground. Also, if you notice, because we've done that, there's also some hyperextension in the pelvis now. So you can see that doesn't look good. The leg extends too far. So we can add a separate offset for the pelvis. Something like pelvis retarget offset. And then we set that default value to maybe 1.5. Something small, just so it doesn't squash it down too much, but then you don't get that hyperextension. So that looks pretty good. Alright. So if we've done everything correctly, we should see now that the feet are offsetting, and they are, which is great. Unfortunately though, because we're retargeting, we're going to run into some other issues. Like, as you can see, the turning in place doesn't work. Some of the foot curves for the stopping transitions, they don't work. As you can see, that it's not working as it should. Also things like the physics asset, it's not set up correctly, so it actually does not follow the character. So that's just some things that I'll be covering in part 2 of this video. But hopefully that should be a good enough overview of a skeleton that just doesn't work with the mannequin, right out of the box. So yeah.